Bhaktivinoda. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. When someone heard the chanting of the holy name from the mouth of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, and someone else heard this chanting from that second person, and someone again heard this chanting from the third person, everyone in all countries became a Vaishnava through such disciplic succession. Thus everyone chanted the holy name of Krishna and Hari, and they danced, cried, and smiled. Lord Chaitanya, he was indiscriminately giving the pure holy name to everybody. And he wasn't considering whether they were qualified or not. So such is the potency of Lord Chaitanya that simply, regardless of anyone who was qualified or not, and we've seen last week we were talking about the animals in Jarikanda forest. They've certainly been in the animal species of life meant that they were undergoing the results of the previous activities accumulated as a human being. In the animal species of life, you don't accrue karma, you're experiencing it. In the human form of life, you have a responsibility and we accrue karma. Then after that, karma will dictate. We are the masters of our own destiny in that sense. In the human form of life, it's mentioned atato brahma jigyasa. Now that we have this human form, and it's time to inquire about knowledge of the real self. The self which is our consciousness. So sometimes it's called the soul, the self, atma, jiva, so many different names in different cultures and languages. But ultimately, the symptom of that self is consciousness. And we can see that that consciousness is present in all species of life. Therefore, that exhibits the symptoms of the soul. And this individual soul takes the opportunity, when they have some freedom of choice, to behave in whichever way they feel inclined. And if they're guided by the Vedic literatures and they make the decisions based on that, then they can extricate themselves from the cycle of birth and death. So there's different ways to achieve perfection. So some people say that actually we can never be perfect. So that may be true in one sense, but there's another statement I heard recently, which is actually we're all perfect. We're always all perfect anyway. We've just forgotten it, and we identify with this temporary body, temporary mind, as temporary world, which is full of imperfections. But when we reawaken our original consciousness, which is pure consciousness, so just when Lord Chaitanya was chanting, the potency of his chanting was so pure that immediately living entities, regardless of whatever body they were in, their original pure consciousness was revived. So this is called Sanatan Dharma. We've maybe heard of the word Dharma. Sometimes it's translated into meaning the word religion, but actually Dharma means nature. So just like the nature of water is wet, the nature of fire is light and heat. So if you take away heat, then the fire doesn't have the same effect. If you take away light, then it's not fire. So it combines these two things. Nature of water is wet. So the nature of the living entity is eternal, full of bliss and full of knowledge. We are already full of knowledge, not that we have to acquire it. Simply by the chanting process, we uncover that which is already there. And the instructions, which are in these Vedic literatures, they're simply reminding us of the knowledge we already have. It's interesting that one so-called yogi and Swami called himself a guru, but he was saying that you shouldn't read books. You know, we shouldn't depend on books for our knowledge. We shouldn't read books. But where did he say that? In his book. So such is the onset of Kali Yuga. It's like doing something wrong, confronting someone and saying, don't do this. I wonder if he was actually serious or if he was just on the gravy train. Anyway, he was right. Don't read his book. But these books, these Vedic literatures, are not just some mundane book or someone's opinion or someone's speculation. These books are coming from the manufacturer. So just like Prabhupada often gives an example, if we have a microphone and we don't know how to use it, we look at the instructions and it says, okay, you need this type of cable with a certain plug and it plugs into this, don't plug it into the socket. I used to work in a shop in Glasgow selling musical instruments, and someone had came back and said that the electric guitar didn't work. So we plugged it into an amp and says, no, it's fine. It says, oh, well, I plugged it into the socket and the wall. I tried to plug it into the socket, but the thing was the wrong type of plug. It's just as well it didn't work because he would have killed himself. So people think, with poor fund of knowledge, they can do things which are dangerous, but they think they're right. So similarly, with our own opinion, we may create so much havoc for ourselves because the laws of nature are not, subject to our opinion. What was the name of that king who put his throne on the shore and ordered the tide to stop? It wasn't Midas, was it? King Canute. So he was so puffed up with his power, then he ordered his servants to put his throne on the beach, and then he told the waves, okay, don't come in. But they didn't listen to him. So, did he drown? He was so puffed up he wouldn't give up. I don't know if he did drown actually, but either he was drowned or he was humbled. Yeah. So this is the foolishness of us in the material world. We think that we can conquer over material nature, but material nature is just so powerful. Within a couple of arrangements, mankind could be wiped out all forgotten. It can happen so easily. Just like now, we're experiencing this COVID pandemic, and this is only a slight thing of the material nature, whether it was man-made, natural-made, whatever it is, certainly been brought about. And we can see that it wouldn't take much to create. It doesn't take much to create havoc to human civilization. So when we become proud and we just follow our own opinions and we don't take any notice of the Vedic literatures, which are telling us, Krishna is telling us in the Bhagavad Gita, if you do this and you do that, then you can live happily for hundreds of years. It's a sustainable way of life. We're not exploiting the resources of material nature, not trying to lord over the resources of material nature. The leaders of society serving their dependents and not exploiting them. When are we going to see that? Only when people actually start to understand what is the purpose of this life, what is the purpose of this world. And Lord Chaitanya, personally, he came to revive the Sanatana Dharma, or eternal nature of the living entity, to remind them, that Jiv Jag will wake up, sleeping soul, and you don't belong here. You belong somewhere which is far better than here. And I've come to invite you back. All you got to do is chant. And you just chant, that's your passport back to the spiritual world. It's the cure for all ills. So we might find a cure for COVID. We might come up with something else for another disease. But ultimately we cannot cure disease because it will manifest in one way or another because karma is there. So the only way to become free from disease altogether is to not have a material body. We see even babies, right, they're catching all sorts of diseases. Sometimes, babies very vulnerable, and to get past even the first year, sometimes there's so many threats upon it. So right from the word go, then we're vulnerable to disease all the way through our life. Anything can happen. Doesn't matter what age you are. So as long as we've got a body, then there is there's always a threat of some disease, or we have to be very careful not to do something which causes us to prematurely finish our term in this body. You fall the wrong way and you bump your head, that could be the end of it. These things are the facts of life. But this is only the fact of life relating to the fragile material body we have. But the true fact of life is that we are not this body and we don't die and we're not subject to disease, only the body is. And we are actually eternal spiritual beings. And we don't need material energy, we don't need all the different sense objects which we have. Okay, we have a body, so we engage in some things just for the maintenance of the body, but our real function is spiritual realization. Srila Prabhupada said that society at large is working so many hours of the day, so many days of the week, simply to maintain themselves, to afford a house. And to afford a house, then they have to sign up for 25 years for a mortgage. So they cannot, by the time they own it, then there's not much time left to enjoy it. So they have to leave it behind for someone else. So this is going on, and ultimately, as they say, it's castles made of sand, which will just slip into the sea eventually. The words of Jimi Hendrix. So this is a fact. This is true knowledge. To see the temporary nature of the material world, and to realize that, not to become despondent upon realizing it, but to realize this is a sign that we don't belong here. Just like if the fish comes out of the water and it's got amnesia and it forgets where it came from, then it might get despondent if it thinks, I'm not going to be able to survive in this world. I want to enjoy, but I can't because, I can't survive in this world. I've only got a short period of time. So we're like that. We want to enjoy eternally, but this world, this body doesn't allow it. So that is a sign that we don't belong here. And Lord Chaitanya, this chanting is actually bringing the spiritual world, Go Lokera, Premadana, Harinama Sankirtan. It's bringing the spiritual world to the material world. And in a higher sense, there is no material world. It's only something which we relate to as being real. It's true in the sense that it's a temporary manifestation, it's a temporary reality. But actually there's no real substance to it. If you look under a microscope, you break it down, and there's all little molecules and atoms, just like this microphone stand, and on a molecular level, it doesn't even exist. You can't discriminate between this and other molecules. And in Bhagavad Gita, Krishna says that everything is resting on me as pearls strung on a thread. So a pearl necklace looks very beautiful, but if you take away the thread, then it has no substance, it just scatters everywhere. So all spiritual material worlds are resting upon Krishna. He's known as Yogeshwara, the supreme yogi, the master of all mystic potencies. And when you understand that statement, everything rests upon Krishna as pearl strung on a thread, then we're not surprised when we see wonderful activities of Krishna, like holding a hill up as a small boy. It appears like that. There's so many wonderful pastimes of Krishna. Then we can accept all of them. And even the pastimes which you know about, they're only a small insight into Krishna's eternal daily pastimes. So one thing here in this purport is that Lord Chaitanya was chanting, and people were becoming awakened by this hearing of this chanting, and they too, spontaneously, they would start chanting. And by them going around chanting, then others would hear it, and they would also become, it was like some kind of transcendental spiritual pandemic. Javet knew I was going to say that, didn't you? I could see the smile come up. It was like that. So just like now we have the pandemic, which is spreading, ill fortune upon people, then the pandemic of the chanting actually is something which spreads good fortune. So Lord Chaitanya, he wrote the Shikshastakam in it. He says, this Sankirtan movement is a prime benediction for humanity at large. So last week we were talking about that it benefits not only the humans, but all species of life. Generally humans, when they're interested in some kind of spiritual or religious thing, they don't tend to include the other living entities, considering them as being also spiritual living entities in essence. But here we're seeing Lord Chaitanya is showing that all the living entities are his parts and parcels. And he's not satisfied simply with liberating human society. He wants to liberate all of the living entities. So this parampara system, the more we become pure in our chanting and the more we become pure in our behavior as a devotee, then the more influence our chanting will have upon other people. You know, it's just like Hope and I were talking yesterday about the if you're speaking to someone and your words seem to be the right words, but your body language shows a different intention, then the communication generally is seen like 70 to 80% in body language. So if you're saying something nice, but your body language is telling the person something else, then they won't trust you, unless we're a bit gullible. And sometimes this is the case that you have to trust people until they show something otherwise. Because if we go around all the time, if we choose that, you know, I've been let down, so I'm not going to trust anybody, then we just make ourselves unhappy and insecure. So just using that example, that if our intention is good, and even if our words are not so good, sometimes we might choose the wrong words, but if our intention is good, then we can always rearrange the words to actually express what we mean. But if your intention isn't good and you even say the right words, it won't really have the effect. So therefore, this age we're living in is called the age of quarrel and hypocrisy, where we have leaders who are saying this and saying that, but they're actually not doing that themselves. And therefore, there's so much unrest upon the people because they don't feel that they have much trust. And even when people go to vote, often they're thinking, best use, what's the best lesser of two evils? Sometimes they're thinking like that. I remember one time, not so long ago, that the government was putting out, I'm not anti-government, by the way, I'm just pointing out that there's room for improvement. But they were saying that if you don't come and vote, you'll lose the opportunity to vote soon. It didn't work because people still didn't come and vote. And this is a big problem because there's this saying that people vote with their feet. So if they don't turn up, that means there's something, they don't find there's something worth turning up for. So of course, even the government themselves, if they're sincere individuals trying to do something, then unless they actually have knowledge of what is good, it's not that good and bad is something subjective, like what is good now and what is bad now. We make laws based on that, and then we change, by vox populi, we change that, and then something which was bad before that becomes good now. So you could have been imprisoned for something 100 years ago, and nowadays you won't be imprisoned for it. So it's all based on their opinion and based on ignorance, that they don't really know what is right and what is wrong. Intrinsically, people know what's right and what's wrong. So the effect of our chanting will be when we also give up our hypocrisy and start walking the talk. So as devotees, sometimes we learn so many slokas or Sanskrit verses and we can rattle them off, but we shouldn't be just like a parrot where I can do this one. We may as well, we just know the tune, we're not even listening to the words sometimes. So we really have to try to meditate upon the meanings of these words and make it non-different from the way we live our life. So when they say that there's two ways to associate with the spiritual master, and one is through the vapu, which is physical association. You get physical company. which means that you may be in the same presence of them, you can ask them questions, you can hear from them, etc. And the other way is called Vani, which is through the instruction. And Srila Prabhupada taught us that there's no difference between the Vani and the Vapu. If you are actually living and following the instructions, then your spiritual master is always with you. When Prabhupada was alone in America to begin with, then he, on more than one occasion, he mentioned that he was never alone. He always felt the presence of his spiritual master. So the more we follow the guidance of the spiritual master, then the more we see. Sometimes we don't follow because we can't see it, but you won't see it until you follow. I remember Palindra gave me an example of that. I was given an instruction and I was thinking, I can't see the sense in this. I can't get inspired to follow this instruction. I can't see the sense of it. She says, you won't until you follow it. So she says, just try it and see. So I did, and then I come back and says, yeah, you were right. We couldn't see it until we actually followed it. So it's a bit like the doctor gives some medicine, and you think, what's that little pill going to do? I've got like a sore back for 10 years. What's that pill going to do? It's like, my back's this size, that pill's that size. I don't think so. So just try it. Okay, well, I've tried everything else, I'll just try it, and then you take it, well, it worked. So, of course, we're not saying that's actually the case, but if we try it and it works, then we have faith. And then when we do that a few times, we'll begin to realise, well, maybe the other things which I'm having difficulty conceiving also will be true. This is the nature of Krishna. He's known as Aparushya, beyond the range of the senses. So with our mind and senses, we can only speculate of the nature of the absolute truth, of the nature of the supreme cause of all causes. We can't capture him and put him in a box. We can't make up our own conclusions about it. So that becomes known as Kripa Siddhi, that we get some perfection by the mercy. Kripa means mercy, or Kruna. Like Kruna Bhavan means abode of mercy. So Kripa Siddhi. So at the same time, we don't get that Kripa Siddhi without trying. So this is considered to be like, if you're walking through, sometimes in India they have paddy fields and they have wells to water the fields for the irrigation system, but sometimes they dry up and then they leave them. And then if the grass grows up round about it, if you're unaware, you may walk and fall into it. And the only way you get out is if you shout and someone hears you. So you can just imagine you're deep down this well, who knows how long it is, and because you've fallen into it, you've broken some bones. So you're not in a great condition, but you shout for help, and then someone hears it, and they go and get a rope and throw the rope down. But you have to grab onto the rope, and you have to try to help yourself up as well. And by the help of the person pulling you, and you also holding on to the rope, even though it's painful, then you will get out. So that's what it's like, isn't it? What was it they say? God likes those. God helps those who help themselves. God likes a trier. So we do have to try. It's not to think, well, I'll just depend on God's mercy, and meanwhile I'll just put my feet up and just enjoy myself. And on the other hand, we think, well, it's all my work, I'm doing it myself. So Krishna also explains to us that we shouldn't see ourselves as being the doer of activity. Sometimes this is hard to understand because we have the desire to control. Sometimes people are labelled as control freaks, but we're all control freaks in one sense, that we all want to maintain some control of our life. But there's so many things which happen out with our control. So when we can understand that and realise that actually I'm not the supreme controller, there's so many things which are going on out with me, and then we can surrender to Krishna, who is the supreme controller. So we have a little control, we have a little freedom of independence, and according to the Vedic literature, the best use of that independence is to willingly take to the path of self-realization so that we can free ourselves from the cycle of birth and death. And Bhagavad Gita, Krishna explains that for one who's born, death is certain, just like everybody who's been born dies, and we all know that's coming sometime. Also, one who has died, birth is certain in the same sense. But Janma Karma Chime Divyam, if we know Krishna's Janma, his birth, and his Karma, his activities, as being divine, Divyam, interesting that word, Divyam and divine sound very close related, then Naiti Mam Iti Sorjana, that we do not take birth again in material world, but attain his eternal abode. If we can understand Krishna as not being an ordinary person, not a historical person, and that comes by following the teachings. When we follow these teachings, we follow instructions, then it becomes alive. So we'll just stop there. If there's any questions, this is our. You see, this is what we've inherited. This parampara is that we have got something from someone which is benefiting us, and we're not misers. We want to give it to other people. And this is parampara. Okay, any questions, comments? Yes.
What's the gravy train?
The gravy train is basically it's just like a situation where people are scratching each other's back, and they're all getting a good payoff from it.
Interesting. And how does gravy have to do with that? They all get gravy?
Yeah. Certainly, a lot of them get free meals.
I was just a comment really, but you know, when you were saying about they tried to make people vote, it just reminded me of that story. The king wanted to find out who the laziest people were. So he asked the minister, and the minister says, well, just invite them all for a feast and set the building on fire. So they did that. It was just two of them lying, and one was saying, it's a bit hot, isn't it? He says, just lie over on your other side, it won't be so bad. And then he knew that they were. And I was thinking, well, because we must have quite a lot of lazy people that even though everything is so terrible, they're still not actually prepared to go and do something about it. You know, they'd sooner just try and change their position, try and make themselves a little bit comfortable.
Exactly. You know, unless it's going to actually affect their ability to buy cigarettes and booze and whatever else, then you're not going to get much action. Of course, we're not calling for people to storm the Houses of Parliament or something like that, but people willingly dope themselves, and dope in the sense that they make themselves, they
Desensitized.
well, they cash in their own intelligence just for some temporary kind of intoxication. They give up their own intelligence. I remember when I was younger and I used to take intoxication, I was thinking, this doesn't help me any. In fact, it's just handicapping me. I feel like, you know, some people are born with some physical or mental handicap, and I'm perfectly fine, but I'm just making myself stupid. That's not very smart. You're just taking some alcohol or drug or something like that, and what's effectively is enjoying the demise of your own brain cells, your own health. And that's not very smart. So I decided, you know, that it was better that I gave up all that. It was probably higher. Try to get high, just get high on being free from all that stuff. Don't be dependent on it. What kind of pleasure can that be that you're dependent on it? And if you don't have it, then you freak out.
Yeah, they say that people don't change so much by seeing the light, they change more by feeling the heat. So it's not usually until it's very uncomfortable for you that you change. But then they also say people want freedom from choice, not freedom of choice, because freedom of choice implies that it's your responsibility. And freedom from choice means that you're just a victim, you see, so you don't have to blame. You can't be blamed, you're just a victim, you see.
Yeah, it's true. It's interesting that because when we have one leader, then people blame them for all the wrong things and they want to get him out, get this one in. Then they put the person in, the one that shouldn't have in, they start picking faults at that one. So they don't want to take responsibility for themselves, they don't want to think. You know, if people start to think more and make demands, then the response of the government would have to be in relation to that, because it's all about supply and demand, isn't it? If the demand is such that everybody wants the planet to be cared for, then that starts to happen, and that's what's going on. In the 70s, you know, that was getting nowhere until a certain accumulation of people came to the point where it became a voice. So the thing about Krishna consciousness is once you start to awaken to your original constitutional position, then if you try to go back to sleep again, it's like someone pretending to sleep. You know you're not sleeping. Other people know you're not sleeping. They say that it's harder to awaken someone who's pretending to sleep than someone who's actually sleeping. So if someone's pretending to sleep, you get a chance to awaken. And often people get that in their life. They get a chance, like, oh, what's this? I'm going to bury my head in the sand again. It's too painful to wake up to this reality. And we all get it. Sometimes someone may say or do something which makes us aware that, you know, we're not as good as we thought we were in some way. And we have to be a bit humble, and that's actually a strength. It's been falsely promoted that to be proud is strength, but actually humility is strength. Well, it takes strength to admit you're wrong, and then from that you can actually become right. But if you're just always right, then how are you going to improve?
Do you think it's a coincidence that Glasgow is now like, or it was the vegan capital of Europe, and it was also a place where the Garanga campaign was in full swing, and so many books were passed out, so many holy names, so many haridams took place, you know, over a period of time. It just seemed to reach a kind of saturation point, and then, because it was the last, when I first came up to Glasgow, if you'd have told me in 20 years it's going to be the, in fact they say somebody wanted a tombstone made in Glasgow and they didn't have one. It's for a 70-year-old. It was all like, because the diet was so unhealthy, nobody got that far yet. Somebody says he's 70, I haven't got one.
Yeah, well, it's interesting because we've got to finish just within the next minute. But yeah, I'm sure Prabhupada said that anything good which is happening as a result of the Sankirtan movement, so just by the chanting, even if our chanting isn't completely pure, the fact that we're chanting means some purification is going on. So we continue chanting and we continue to become more pure. So even by that, then people are taking so many different things. And people have attributed, I've had people in the street come up to me and say that they became vegetarian on account of our books, or they gave up this or gave up that, or it saved their life. So it's certainly, there was one Irish politician who, there was some yoga and well-being convention, and he said, let's not forget the Hare Krishnas who started all this knowledge about yoga, karma, vegetarianism, etc. So certainly it's, we're not looking to be honoured in some way, but through the chanting of the holy names, we become purified, and all the good qualities which are there within will start to manifest. And this is what you see on a greater scale. The more people who chant, then the more good will actually start to manifest in society. It's coming in the key.
Yeah.
Key. Chaitanya, the key.